Alphonse Capone was born in Brooklyn in 1899. His parents had come from Italy with hopes for a better life. They worked hard, but the family lived in poverty. Brooklyn's immigrant neighborhoods were crowded and rough. Children learned to fight early. Al Capone was one of 9 kids. He had a quick temper, and he was strong with his fists. At 14, he struck a teacher. He left school for good. The streets became his classroom. Street gangs ruled his neighborhood. Young Capone ran errands for them. He learned loyalty, money, and violence. He met mobsters who shaped his future. The most important was Gianni Torrio. Torrio was calm, patient, and calculating. He saw potential in Capone. He became a mentor to the hot-headed teen. Capone took work as a bouncer. One night, he insulted the wrong man. The man slashed his face with a knife. Capone was left with 3 scars. From then on, he was called Scarface. He hated the name, but the scar gave him a reputation. In 1919, Torrio called him to Chicago. Capone left Brooklyn behind. Chicago was alive with jazz and skyscrapers. It was also filled with crime and corruption. That same year, everything changed. The United States banned alcohol. Prohibition had begun. Americans didn't stop drinking. Instead, they turned to speakeasies, bars hidden in basements and back rooms. Bootleggers supplied the liquor. The demand was endless. And for criminals, it was an opportunity. Capone quickly adapted to the new world. He worked closely with Torrio. He arranged deals. He bribed police. He intimidated rivals. Every move earned him more respect. Capone was no longer just another thug. He was becoming a trusted lieutenant. He learned how to run the business, how to hide shipments, how to keep politicians quiet. The money was huge. The risk was bigger, but Capone thrived in danger. The young immigrant boy was changing. He had ambition beyond the streets, and Chicago gave him the chance. By the early 1920s, his reputation grew. People feared his fists. They also admired his boldness. Capone was no longer a street tough. He was standing at the gates of an empire. The Prohibition era had only just begun, and soon it would make him king. Chicago, mid-1920s. The city was booming, but also bleeding. Gianni Torrio was nearly killed in an ambush. He decided to retire, and he handed everything to his young protegé. At only 26, Al Capone was suddenly the boss. The Chicago outfit was his to command. The streets were ruled by bullets. Rival gangs fought for every drop of bootleg liquor. Gunfire echoed across neighborhoods. Newspapers reported killings almost daily. Capone understood the rules of survival. Fear alone was not enough. He built an empire with strategy. He expanded into gambling. He opened brothels. He reached into politics. He bribed police and judges. Capone turned crime into a corporation. Managers handled operations. Accountants tracked money. Enforcers kept rivals in line. Profits reached tens of millions each year. Capone became rich beyond imagination, but he also built a public image. Fine suits, silk ties, and diamonds. He tipped waiters with $100 bills. He posed for photographs with celebrities. Crowds cheered when they saw him. Too many working-class Chicagoans. It was a hero. He gave food to the poor. He donated to hospitals. He paid for charities. But behind the generosity was fear. Rivals vanished. Bodies turned up riddled with bullets. Capone's men carried out killings with ruthless precision. No one dared stand against him. In 1929, violence reached its peak. On Valentine's Day morning, a gang was lured into a garage. 7 men lined up against a brick wall. Moments later, machine guns roared. The men were cut down in cold blood. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre shocked America. Photographs of the bodies filled newspapers. The country was horrified. Capone was never convicted, but everyone believed he had ordered the massacre. His reputation became larger than life. He was now the most feared gangster in the nation, and the most famous Capone still appeared in public. He dined in restaurants openly. He attended baseball games. He laughed with politicians. He smiled for cameras. It was as if the law could not touch him. For a time, that seemed true, but power brought enemies. Rival gangs plotted against him. The public mood was shifting. The newspapers turned against him. Headlines branded him public enemy #1. Capone enjoyed the spotlight, but attention made him vulnerable. The government could no longer ignore him. Agents began tracking his empire. Bank accounts were studied. Breweries were raided. Informants began to speak. Capone's world was tightening. By the late 1920s, his empire stood at its height. He was rich, untouchable, and feared. But the storm was coming. The same fame that once protected him would soon lead to his downfall. By the early 1930s, Al Capone was untouchable. He was rich, feared, and admired. His empire stretched across Chicago. His name was known in every home, but his fame had become dangerous. The public was turning against him. The Valentine's Day massacres still haunted the nation. Newspapers demanded justice. Politicians wanted results. President Herbert Hoover gave the order. Capone must fall. The government launched a campaign, but murder charges never stuck. Witnesses were terrified into silence. Judges and police were on his payroll. Capone seemed invincible. Then the government changed its strategy. They followed the money. Accountants tracked his profits. Every dollar told a story. Capone had never filed taxes. Tax evasion became their weapon. At the same time, agents hit his empire. Elliot Ness and his untouchables raided breweries. They smashed liquor barrels. They made headlines across America. Capone mocked them at first, but the pressure was building. In 1931, he was indicted. The trial became a national spectacle. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse. Capone arrived in silk suits, smiling. He was sure he could bribe his way out. But this time the system held firm. The jury was switched at the last moment. His lawyers could not stop the evidence. Accountants testified against him. The verdict was guilty. Capone was sentenced to 11 years in prison. The crowd gasped. The King of Chicago was led away in chains. At first, he was sent to Atlanta. His wealth still gave him small luxuries, but the government stepped in again. Capone was transferred to Alcatraz. The prison on the rock, cold, isolated, impossible to escape. Here, Capone's power vanished. There were no bribes, no luxury, no opium. His health began to collapse. Years of untreated syphilis attacked his brain. He became confused, paranoid, broken. The once mighty gangster faded into weakness. In 1939, he was released for medical reasons. His empire was gone. His power was gone. He retreated to Florida with his family. There, he lived quietly in a mansion. His mind slipped further each year. He wandered the gardens in silence. On January 25, 1947, Al Capone died. He was only 48 years old. The man who ruled Chicago with fear died broken and forgotten. But his legend lived on. His story became part of American history. A tale of power, crime, and downfall. Capone rose as a king and fell as a prisoner of his own sins. No empire lasts forever.